this is a really interesting and important point, and the issue is that we human beings are built for an oscillation between boom and bust circumstances. And in a boom, we experience what economists would call growth. And when things are growing, you can afford to be decent to other people. When you reach a point of austerity, what happens is tribalism breaks out, because the way to deal with what is effectively an addiction to growth that we have when the growth runs out is to generate pseudo-growth by figuring out who can't defend what they have and going after it. And this is the thing that has caused the worst atrocities in history. And the task for us is to realize that the increase in polarization and tribalism at the moment is actually something we should expect. It happens at this point in history, and the trick for us is to figure out how to break this boom and bust oscillation so that we are not repeatedly exposed to these extremely dangerous outbreaks of tribalism.
Well, I don't know. I think I agree, but there's another move in history, and there is a move in history which is that when certain civilizations become actually quite wealthy and quite content, they tend to fragment because they have everything they need. We saw that, in the late Roman Empire, and it's as if they lose the capacity for their own cohesion. And when that happens, those who are tribal can come in and ram through that like kind of weakened civilization and just like and sort of bust through it. And so to me, I get the sense that the increased polarization in our society is that it's not just polarization. I think there's also just a basic fragmentation. And that fragmentation is almost physically real. It's physical, even in the manner in which we develop our the layout of houses and the layout of suburban neighborhoods, where we don't, like, I've been in my neighborhood for 15 years and I barely know my neighbors. And I think most people in North America have that same experience. It's like, so we are like the tissue, the mesh that created whatever it is that we are, like whatever civilization, whatever is fragmenting. And so I think that's one of the things that is causing the chaos, at least. And the problem is that some people who see that fragmenting, they're afraid, and they want to pull back and say, okay, we need to get something really straight, something really hard, and then they tend to go towards tribalism. It's like, it's beyond like the economic. I mean, I think that the economic thing can kind of unleash it. But if you look at Weimar Germany and you look at where we are now, the social tendencies and like the kind of underlying feeling that things are falling apart were there too, and then an economic disaster created that crazy kind of. So I think there's quite a few level of things happening at the same time.
I think we don't exactly know what's causing the polarization. I think that you could attribute it to some degree to rising levels of inequality. That might be particularly true in the US. But the polarization is also occurring in Europe, and it's also occurring to a lesser degree in Canada. So I think it's something, inequality is no trivial thing, and it has profound effects. But I think there's other things going on as well. We don't know the role that social media plays. Like, I do think that it's working as an amplifier. You now hear about every idiot thing the radical left does, right? Instantly, and you hear every idiot thing the radical right does too. And I think it radically distorts your perception of how unstable the world is. Like, one of the things that was really interesting over the last 2 or 3 decades is that crime took a nosedive in a major way, at exactly the same time that the incidence of crime reporting in the news climbed to new heights. And so people are convinced, we're convinced, well, even now, that things are far more dangerous than they've ever been, ever. And that's not true. Like, general civil society is safer than it's been since 1962. And in 1962, it was basically safer than it's ever been ever in the history of the world. And so the media the information matrix that we're looking at the world through isn't giving us an accurate sample of what's out there. And I think and I can see this to some degree when I'm looking at Twitter, is that I get a feed of outrageous things that are happening on campus. It's like, God, there's hundreds of colleges and universities, and at any given time, the probability that someone is doing something that's stupid in a newsworthy fashion is like 100%. And in any reasonable society, basically, I'd never know about it. And so then I'd have to sample the environment that's right around me, which actually turns out to be pretty damn stable. Like at the University of Toronto, the proportion of people who are committed Antifa-type radicals is like none. It's 1 in 1,000 maybe, or maybe it's 1 in 500, but we're looking at the world through this mediated perceptual structure, and it isn't clear that it's giving us unbiased information. So